that's when they found 3 more grenades.
They say criminals have used trial and error to try to see what they can get away with. So the same people are committing crimes over and over.
There's no consequences to their actions. Write them a ticket and turn them loose, they just do it again.
One day, his son felt sick. School officials couldn't reach him or his son's mother, so they ended up releasing him to Richard Taylor, a registered sex offender.
Residents are facing unemployment now that Rough and Ready Lumber Mill is closing its doors after 90 years in business.
So here we are, yet again, rounding out another big boy project, and I'm not sitting there mindlessly clicking on Danger Men in RuneScape. I'm ready to move on. Yet one thing I'd like to add, like I did with my Begotten review, is how this film has impacted me as a person, because one thing I think all art has the power to do is instill something in the viewer or listener. Sometimes the impact is pretty small, like how I was watching Breaking Bad and noticed Jesse's mom was making some enchilada dish and said, "Hey, that sounds good," and I made something like that for dinner. Sometimes an impact is massive, like how I heard Batushka's first album after one of my ex-girlfriends broke up with me, and the melancholic but beautiful atmosphere of their music inspired my overall musical outlook and style afterwards. Then you have what I can only call sleeper art, where you're exposed to something at a young age but don't unlock the full impact of it until later. It's not just with my example of how Begotten was a lot like my own art, and how I'd seen the film in passing from a music video. No, I've got other sleeper art examples, like how the music of Metal Gear Solid inspired my love of synth and choir as I grew older. The look and sound of Star Trek Voyager, despite it being kinda shit, is so warming to me and just feels so comfortable because I do my grade school homework to it in the background when I get home after school, and I can't forget that vibe the show had. It was just so comfy. And of course you have stuff like the original Sims 1 being responsible for my love of isometric video games, stemming even farther back to my first exposure to PC games with titles like Red Alert, Tiberian Sun, and the first Diablo game, which my mom's lunatic sister described as that nasty Diablo game. Fuck her, Diablo's great. Yet you'll notice I find all these things positive aspects of my overall artistic and recreational side. I tend to replay the Metal Gear series every few years to enjoy the nostalgia of my dad playing it on the original PS1. I find Voyager great to watch when I want to sleep because it's just so boring. God knows how many hours of my fucking life I've wasted playing Diablo 2 just trying to get John Burr runes. However, what makes TCM so special to me? I was born in 1994, so I have no nostalgia of it coming out in theaters. I was born in Oregon, so I don't have a state attachment or anything like that. I didn't even watch the movie fully until I was 18, on YouTube, for free, because someone was kind enough to sacrifice their channel and get it banned probably a day after that upload went up. The legacy of TCM for me is that it was a movie I had only heard of, not seen. You'll hear a lot of YouTubers like James Rolfe, the Red Letter Media crew, and Doug Walker describe the idea that horror films in their era, usually the 70s or 80s, was this kind of forbidden or sleazy art. For me, this was kind of not the case. My dad loves horror films, and every chance he could, he would watch a Friday the 13th film if it was on TV, or make the wonderful idea of showing me something like Rambo or Terminator or Saving Private Ryan. You know, fun for the whole family kind of films. Now, as much as we joke about it now, this story means a lot to me, and it's something I kind of took for granted as a kid, but Jesus Christ, dude, I miss Blockbuster. You have no idea how special it was for me to go there with my parents to rent a game or a film. If it wasn't for Blockbuster and my dad's general lack of giving a fuck about the ESRB, I wouldn't have been exposed to things like the Mortal Kombat franchise or some of my favorite films like 300, Manhunter, or the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You gotta realize, in retrospect, renting movies with my parents is one of the few positive memories I have with them. Yeah, I know there's obviously more than just films, but consider this. My parents both worked themselves to the bone, had a horrible relationship, and making time for something like a board game or a film was special, so any movie rental, to me, meant that I'd at least get to see my parents kind of be themselves, if only for an hour and a half.
Seth, nobody cares about your melodramatic.
Shut the fuck up, I didn't ask you, you fat idiot! Anyways, I remember one day that I went to Blockbuster after school with my parents, And you know, obviously my parents would rent shit that they wanted to watch, so I'd pick out a movie or two and they'd pick out a few for them just to watch.
Lol, Lonely Space Vixens, Rugrats got away with it!
I'd either have to find a picture of it or make my own for this series, but I remember this image of my dad standing by the new release section and seeing this fucking film staring me down. Yeah, I know, this wasn't the same TCM we're talking about right now, but consider this for a moment. I've been raised to kind of consider the classic horror films as kitsch, for lack of better expression. Okay, the better expression is fucking incredibly bad, but you get the idea. I mean, my older cousin Jason went as Jason Voorhees for Halloween all the time, so to me, horror films were just shit you knew was fake and kind of played along with. The image of my dad standing in front of that display with like a dozen of these DVDs all staring back at me, it's been stuck in my head for ages, and I remember my mom walking next to him and saying something like, "Oh, good old Leatherface, you want to rent it?" And just hearing that name, Leatherface. I didn't really know what leather was at this point in time, but I knew what a chainsaw was and had this instant panic response. I think it's one of the first times in my life I got freaked out by just the name alone, next to Nutty Professor, but that's another story. I just kept staring at that box, man, with that washed out sepia tone and that damn face, and I was actually kind of freaked out because I noticed my dad was actually gonna rent it. He was gonna rent a fucking copy of this movie, dude. Can you believe that shit? It didn't matter that you got it in a Blockbuster DVD case, dude. It's just the name, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was sitting next to my rental copy of fucking Spy Kids 2 or some shit. It just freaked me out because I had this weird fear that my dad would make me watch this or something. Now, when I was a kid, our house didn't have very thick walls, and we had really cool surround sound. One of the advantages of living out in the middle of nowhere was that you could just blare a surround sound, just like the theaters. I've secondhand watched Fargo, Scarface, and God knows how many other films because of that surround sound. I just recall my parents telling me to go to bed and hearing that damn movie. The ominous music, muffled chainsaw sounds, screaming. I didn't even dare go out and try to see what it was. Just the sound alone was too much for me, and I remember I couldn't sleep, and I just kept this pillow over my head the whole time trying to block out the idea of the film. The next few days at school, which I must have been in at least 3rd grade if I recall, it seemed like everyone was talking about this damn movie or the ever-popular Blair Witch Project. I can't explain it. It was just like the universe said, Seth's scared of this bullshit movie. Let's torture him and remind him of it at all times now. Keep in mind, Scary Movie was out by now, and obviously it's a parody movie, but that doesn't matter when your brain is a marshmallow and you think that the honeycomb mascot is real and lives inside you if you get too excited about the cereal. God, I recall this one kid. His name was Colt, and he had the kid voice, where it's like, it's kind of muffly, and he, for some reason, watched this movie and told me about how Leatherface would wear people's skin as masks, and it just freaked me the fuck out because he was talking about this movie like it was a fact of life and it actually happened in Texas. I conjured up this horrifying idea in my mind of a giant dude chasing people with a chainsaw in the woods, carving into them, and it just freaked me out. And like I said, this was all just the idea. Mind you, like I said earlier, I lived in an area that was heavily wooded and had to walk alone sometimes to feed our horses and cows, so suddenly, every broken twig or weird noise in the distance was now a chainsaw-wielding cannibal just waiting to turn me into an all-season Halloween mask. Every time one of our neighbors would fire up a chainsaw to clear out dead limbs or overgrowth, it was Leatherface, lost in the woods, trying to find his way in the dark to get to my room. Now, like all good 90s kids, I read a shitload of Goosebump novels, religiously read the Scary Stories series, and I was fortunate enough to be around for the Blair Witch's heyday. Couple this with my newfound nightmare fuel of Leatherface, who I didn't even know what the fuck he looked like, and I was a wreck to be alone outside. Obviously, you can imagine what would happen each time we go back to Blockbuster. I'd be looking for that damn movie cover every time, and I'd try to loop my parents away from the horror section because I could glance it like it was stalking me and never too far away. One of the worst memories around this time was whenever we didn't want to drive all the way to town to rent a movie, we'd visit our local market, which is one of the 3 buildings where I grew up. Inside, they had a room sectioned off for game and movie rentals, and we'd occasionally go in there to save time. I can never forget my mom asking the guy in there if they had any new movies in, and he just said, "We got the new Leatherface movie in," and it just fucking undid me. In my mind, our tiny town was now a victim of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I'd have to be extra vigilant each time we walked in there to check for movies because nowhere was safe now. Obviously, I can see someone going, well, it just sounds like you're a big old fucking pussy bitch, and you know what, you're right, but I was also like barely 6 or 7, so fuck you, you're a big old pussy bitch, and I'm much more handsome than you, right? Also, I'd like to point out, I figured out the movie was fake somehow. I don't know how or when, but the idea lingered in me for so many years. I conjured up ideas of sepia-toned, blood-stained wooden buildings, deep, dark woods full of too many places for a monster to hide. Most importantly of all, a tool so brutal and so loud that could chew through flesh and bone like it was nothing. Now, one of the most important games of my generation was arguably Resident Evil 4. There's no denying the impact this game had on the gaming industry, and the fact some corporate shitheads remade it for brain-dead shitheads says a lot about its overall staying power. Once that game came out, you can imagine what game covers struck my eye the most, and the peripheral that came with it for some extra couple of dollary dues. I must have been in my early teens when I played RE4, but I was paranoid that one of the Chainsaw Ganados would come out at any time. The Bella sisters fucking did me in, man, and I'd always go down the route with the giant because that subconscious fear of a chainsaw enemy was so real to me. It also is interesting because Dr. Salvador, the Bella sisters, and Super Salvador are the only enemies in that entire fucking game that could one-hit kill you outside of QTEs and the Horsehead Plaga. That level of threat in a game was so fucking real to me, and that goddamn minecart section would have me shitting bricks regardless of the fact every enemy, even on hard mode, has drastically reduced health to compensate for the speed of the cart. Even in Mortal Kombat 5, there's a bit of concept art for what would eventually become the Slaughterhouse stage in MK6, and it just fucking did me in as well, where there was this stretched out facial skin on the arena, and you know, that was what freaked me out in a game where you could pull out someone's fucking skeleton out of their back. God, let's not even talk about House of the Dead 2's fucking cabinet, man. Needless to say, one fateful day to Blockbuster had solidified a fear in me that I didn't even know the name of at the time: backwoods horror. You could argue that I was more or less afraid of skin mutilation, but it was more or less the idea of someone or something lurking in the middle of nowhere. As I grew older, the chainsaw fear diminished, probably in part of the Gears of War series because, you know, attaching a chainsaw to an assault rifle is the equivalent of covering a big titty goth girl in black licorice. For me, at least. It was actually Davey Dustin, now Mythhunters Union, that got me aware of Ed Gein when I was a teenager with his The Truth About the Chainsaw Killer video. I swear this video is older than YouTube actually says it is, by the way, because learning about Ed Gein got me really thinking. Maybe the reason I'm afraid of the TCM concept is because of human depravity. I know I hadn't been fully destroyed about going back into the woods just yet because I hadn't had my first Sasquatch encounter. That wouldn't happen until I was 16. Yet something about the isolation and total uncaring nature of the wilderness as people like Gein just fucking danced around with a belt made of nipples, it just felt like a pagan fear. Now, let's fast forward to my first viewing of the film. I must have been rewatching Davey's videos because, you know, I actually watch things numerous times over years because I'm weird like that. I was 18 and in a bad place. If you dig through my old videos, and I'm talking my old TF2 days videos, I was arguably the most existentially fragile, emotionally unstable, and at the most delusional phase of my entire life. Like, I can't even lie. I was fucked mentally. If you think I'm bad now, oh boy. This was the time of my life I can only recall vague moments from because I was so mentally far gone. I was in a dead-on-arrival relationship that was kept alive only through me being gaslit and lied to. I was unemployed and had totally abandoned my family and school's plans for college. I was so deluded, just playing bass, video games, and isolating myself from all popular culture and social media. I had no concept of time, space, or anything. Just a vague sense that things will be good soon, trust me. I was having constant nightmares brought on by emotional insecurities, having started dabbling in the occult and OBE meditation, and of course the ever-present thought of my own inevitable death, as well as my friends and family. The woman I loved didn't love me, But I kept my spirit up, and as my family was fully divorced, divided, and I was losing my home in the process, I had no idea what the fuck the real world was like, and no idea what the fuck my future was. School just taught me that college was the only answer, but I'd realized later in my senior year of high school that's all total bullshit, and a creative type like myself had no place putting himself into 8 years of time and money debt only to have a piece of paper that proved I was a writer. YouTube was what I wanted to do because it was the only solution to me through making animations, let's plays, music, and eventually video essays, like now, to support myself and not have to lift a finger. Remember, I thought working was beneath me and that a creator like me was just misunderstood and that success would just land in my lap. One night after a seriously horrendous existential panic attack and a rapid-fire text to a woman who gave zero fucks about me, I decided to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I really can't tell you why, it just made sense. Having found a full video, I fired it up and holy fuck, it was a bad idea, man. I knew it was fake, obviously, but it felt so real and so visceral, especially towards the end. After I watched it, I just laid there, and it must have been at least 3 in the morning, and I kept thinking the same thought over and over. I'm gonna die, but what if I was treated like I was a slaughterhouse animal? And just, you know, if you've ever had an existential anxiety disorder, you know exactly what this feels like. One thought leads to another, it leads to another, and eventually you're just soft-locked into an emotional numbness. There's no way to really explain it, it's just fear and off, with thoughts like nothing matters and existence is a curse, why do I think this way? I can recall that I was actually crying and freaked myself out so fucking bad that I decided to go outside. Mind you, I was living with my dad at this point because my mom had left the house right before I graduated, but I think he was out with his now wife, so I truly was probably alone. Now, I'm not afraid to admit that I'm a very spiritual person, but for some reason, I just decided the best course of action, and mind you, this is very stupid, was to walk around the property I lived on, but in the horse pasture. Why? I think in my addled state of mind, I could sense something was safe about that area, and the moonlight was casting straight down into a certain patch, so I guess I assumed it was special? Now, you can say I'm totally batshit insane. I don't blame you, but I'm just telling you what happened to me. No, I don't drink or do drugs, I never have, and I don't plan on it, and at this time I was firmly an anti-antidepressant person, believing that my spiritual conviction was all that I needed to get through the depression, which... don't do that. I climbed through the barbed wire barrier and started to walk towards the patch of light. I was wearing some shoes, I think, but all I was wearing was some shorts, if I recall, and it wasn't particularly cold. Keep in mind, I wasn't toned just yet, and I was actually very unhealthy because I wasn't really eating any food from depression, so I'm this skeleton walking towards this light at like 3 a.m. with my brain fried from a panic attack and emotional neglect. You can make of this what you will, but as I walked closer to the light, I felt like everything was slower, and I heard what I can only describe as quiet, choir-like drones in my mind. I was hyper-fixated on the moonlit patch on the ground, so my eyesight was basically doubling the image and making this almost vignette effect with the surrounding darkness, making it even darker. I felt like I was spinning slower and slower with this calming drone reassuring me that what I was doing was totally safe. Once I hit the patch of light, I can only recall seeing some hanging moss on a tree branch, glancing one of the horses sleeping, and the hyperfixation stopped and the sound in my head stopped, and then I had this overwhelming urge to go back inside. I don't even remember really going back inside, but I somehow just managed to get back inside and sleep. Do I think this movie had anything to do with this? God no, I was losing my fucking mind. But I still feel that I think the intense feeling of being food for someone and not having a soul or say in the matter, to be treated like nothing more than meat, that freaked me the fuck out. It was this existential dread that TCM brought out in me, and my emotionally damaged psyche just didn't know how to handle it. I think we all have that one certain movie, show, or an album, and we get this one-off, deep, Providence-filled memory after the event. While I doubt most people would have the reaction I had after watching a movie, it's likely you know what it's like to be affected by something external on a personal level, which, By the way, looking back at over a decade later, I'm so lucky I didn't get killed by something like a rattlesnake, wild dog, horse kicking me in fear, or God knows what. I felt off for days, and no, even back then in my ruined mental state, I don't attribute this event to anything other than my ruined teenage mind and that I focused way too hard on the concept of the meat industry. Now, I used to be a vegetarian, and at this point in my life I wasn't, but it never really dawned on me how truly amoral and strange the concept of raising animals solely for slaughter is. It gets even more confusing because I helped raise cattle my entire life. The same with chickens, turkeys, pigs, and even my next door neighbor raised pigs by the hundreds just for slaughter. You know, it's very different when you raise cows in an open pasture in small quantities of usually 10 to 15 at a time, and you have a strange sense of joy when you're just watching them wander around in the shade or a creek or just relaxing doing something stupid, because they really don't have any threat or reason to be afraid of you. Raising 2 pigs at a time as opposed to 200 is a huge difference, especially when you're feeding them things that you either found or grew yourself. Obviously, as an ex-hunter, I didn't take joy in killing animals. I may have been a good shot, and I still am, but I never felt joy in pulling the trigger on something like quail or grouse. What I loved was being out in nature amongst the animals and watching them do what they do and just blending in. Hunting is one of the few times as humans we can actually put ourselves in a totally survival-based mindset, and I can't really explain it other than it's a primal and instinctual thing that if you get it, you get it. There's one memory I have of being turkey hunting, one of my first times, and I can recall calling in a pack of hens with her younglings and just seeing these animals go about their day being barely 50 feet away from them. Me and my dad didn't shoot them because it was toms only for that season, but in hindsight, I don't think I could. It just didn't feel fair. After watching TCM, I tended to hyperfixate on my first deer I harvested when I was maybe 13 or 14. Even when I made the shot and the deer went down probably only within a few seconds, it always stuck with me that life is fragile. It's one of the most humbling moments in my life, and probably one of the first moments I realized just how small and petty our lives actually are in comparison to everything around us. I didn't need to harvest the deer. I didn't need to impress my dad or his dad or anyone in my family or my friends at the time. I kept thinking after the film, what if the situation was reversed between me and the deer? I saw him hundreds of feet away by just some faint movement. There is no way in hell he could have seen me. That deer was just going about its day. I was about to put a bullet in it for some meat and antlers that we ultimately didn't really need. Anyone who has ever hunted, you know what I mean. You know that crock of shit cultural meme of, oh, the Indians didn't put anything to waste? Yeah, no shit. They didn't gun down buffalo by the thousands just to get some skin to trade and to starve out a culture. One buffalo, deer, or bear only has so much utility for a person or a small family. Consider for a moment just how insane the concept is of exterminating a species. Like, so bad that it fucked up the lives for thousands of people who relied on these creatures for warmth, clothing, food, tools, and tradition. Fucking an entire species up so hard that even now, like in 2025, it's considered a novelty to eat a buffalo burger because they're so scant and only exist because of conservation efforts. Long after the fact, by the way. It's shocking, but as an Oregonian, beavers aren't all that common, and it isn't too hard to guess why when you really think about it. This isn't some SJW left-wing rant, mind you, it's called fucking common sense. The concept of killing something senselessly for pleasure or consumption is bone-chilling. If you're one of those people who believe in that bullshit fad diet called the paleo diet and you think you're some sigma male because you just eat meat, you're a fucking idiot and probably old and stupid, just saying. If you're one of those hippy-dippy save-the-whale neckbeards who eats only plants, I've got some bad news for you, friendo. You're still fat and you're eating celery and cheese, and it isn't making the planet a better place. Real nature doesn't give a shit what you think is the right thing to do. You're trying to boost your own karma for a nebulous concept that doesn't even exist outside of human culture. A shark doesn't care about the seal it's ripping in half. A giraffe doesn't care about the leaves it's eating. A lion doesn't care about a gazelle it's grabbing by the ass. A stalk of corn doesn't care about the spider crawling on it. Now, I can sense someone somewhere going, Seth, you're crazy. You just talked about hallucinating in the moonlight, and now you're trying to call me fat adopting this tread diet. I hate you. You're fat, ugly, and crazy. What does it all mean? Well, something I feel TCM can really hammer in is the fragility of life and the fine line of meat consumption. Think about it. The Sawyers are crazy, yeah, but there are people who've worked in the meat industry who've abused animals. I'm not even going to show it because I can't even bring myself to want to find examples, and they're too much for YouTube, I'm pretty sure. Think about it. Imagine if someone abused a chicken that's never even had more than a few feet to move in. It gets kicked, yelled at, made fun of, and not taken seriously. Imagine it gets slaughtered, and then someone eats only half of it. That's a literal waste of life on all fronts. You can argue that it's just one chicken out of a few thousand in the complex, but that doesn't really matter. It's still wrong fundamentally. Imagine if there was a guy like Grandpa Sawyer who just got a sick sense of joy from bashing in the heads of cattle and boasted about it to people he knew. Is that any better than my story of shooting 3 grouse with 1 shoe on, hopping out of a moving vehicle? What do I have to gain from that story? Knowing what I said earlier about my experience with deer hunting, it makes me sound like a fucking sadist that I consider that skillful. Or that deer I shot was a 300+ yard shot clean through the lungs in the rain. What about this picture of me holding some geese as a teenager on my very last hunting trip? Was it skillful or sadistic that I sat in a blind with 3 other people on my own home and just fired vaguely at a wall of geese and managed to get a few? What's the difference between me and Drayton using deception to lure geese in with decoys, calls, and a camouflage blind? What's the difference between Nubbins' bone furniture versus the deer I shot's rack in my dad's house, or his first rack that he still has from when he was hunting with his dad? What's the difference between Leatherface's processing of everyone in the group and a professional butcher, other than the tools used? Let's look at some other examples if I'm not making my point clear yet. We hang tees with a dead guy on them to show devotion to a religion. We wear clothing made out of byproducts of dead plants, in the case of cotton, dyed with crushed up plants, paid for with bits of paper that don't ultimately mean anything on their own. We'll advertise tacos and chicken nuggets as cute anthropomorphic mascots, even though they're actually the remains of plants and animals that once lived. The point I'm getting across is that TCM may be an extreme, anxiety-riddled nightmare of a film, but it really is a humbling reminder of just how thin the lines of morality and mortality are in our daily lives, from clothing, food, and attitudes towards death. TCM is an extremely bleak film, there's no doubt about it, and if there's one thing it does very well, is highlight how none of the characters outside of the Sawyers are redeemed, revived, or martyred. Everyone but Sally fucking dies. They die in callous, uncaring ways to be consumed and processed, all because of circumstances out of their control. I'm sure Franklin's wheelchair makes a great tool for Grandpa. Oh, Kirk's got some great posture. I'm sure his spine would make for a nice straight lamppost. Aw man, that Pam gal, well, her hair could be used for a nice wig for Grandma. I'd be willing to bet Jerry would hold Leatherface and Drayton over for a lot longer now that Nubbins is gone, and besides, he was just trouble anyways. The more and more you focus on the ideas, the worse and worse they get, because the scariest thing about this film is that the monsters are just people. They're insane, yeah, but they're still people. People like John Osborne and Thomas McGee, Alfred Packer and Armin Muse, they all sound like monsters on paper, but they're as real as they come, and that shit all actually happened. There's a monster lurking in the human psyche, and it doesn't honestly take that much to bring it out in some people. This is why I think that the original TCM is such a special film, and it's an understatement to say that the film isn't part of American culture. We know it's all bullshit made up by a handful of people, but to me, at one point in time, I thought it was real. There's still people that think it's real. That's why I think there never needed to be a sequel to this, or a remake, or a reboot, or a suppository flavor. Nothing in the franchise after this film matters if we just look at this film, because ultimately everything else is just emulating and aping off of what was done here. You can throw all the gore, swearing, and titty nipples you want into a TCM film now, but it doesn't matter because the message is pointless to try and recreate. The emotions are pointless to try and recreate. God knows the fashion is pointless to try and recreate. Jesus. Something I've often considered is how TCM as a franchise has never really became as ultra popular as something like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or even Hellraiser. I think a big part of this is the underlying message of the first film because let's think about it. TCM 2 is a hybrid of horror and comedy. 3 is trying to be spooky but with some fun. 4, you got something going on. And then with the first of too many fucking reboots, it's trying so fucking hard to be edgy and gritty and doing what we in the metal world call as back to the roots syndrome. This basically just means the band's out of ideas, we're going to go broke if we don't put something out. Don't even get me started on how the TCM franchise just shit the bed even farther into the floorboards the later it went on. Like, nobody seems to know what to do with this franchise. I feel the first film really illustrates that because it got everything out it needed to get out and left its mark on cinema history. There's always that one person who will somehow stumble across this film having heard about it from a friend or hearing it was based on a true story. As a metal fan, I still think songs like Real Solution Number 9, House of a Thousand Corpses, Wrapped in Plastic, Nothing to Gain, Dead Skin Mask, all these carry traces of this film's legacy. Games like Dusk, the Power Drill Massacre, and They Hunger will always carry on the vibe of backwoods horror and inspire the imagery that this film helped pioneer into the subconscious. Fuck man, this video out of all 3 in the series is a testament to just how the name and a box of one of the shittier films in the series was able to entrance my whole life and help instill a deeper sense of my place in the world as a teenager. Also, for God's sake, man, Tobe Hooper's soundtrack to this film is incredible and an early example of ambient or noise recorded in such an unconventional and primitive way that it's really quite impressive that it still sounds good and unsettling even after all these years. So, you know, I think I've waxed on long enough about this film, and I'm ready to move on to my next project. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'm gonna commit a felony.
I'm gonna commit felonies.